3rd to order at 5:59 p.m.
And I'll take the roll. Mayor Copeland is absent. Tom Baylor?
Here.
Ken Jones is absent for now. Jeff Guard?
Here.
Melina Meyer?
Here.
Ann Schaefer is absent? That's not her, right? No. David Allison?
Here.
And David Gleason.
Here.
That is a quorum of council.
Okay, so the work session topic tonight is ordinance 1174, implementation of a local raw fish tax. And then the ordinance 1174 is in the regular meeting packet on page 28. Maybe we should start off with a overview of the ordinance from the attorney that wrote it.
There she is.
Sure. All right. This ordinance proposes a very simple as far as administration and implementation, and also the tax filing procedure for the raw fish tax, the 0.5% raw fish tax that the voters approved at the last regular election. In essence, the ordinance, while you have voter approval to implement the tax, this is simply dealing with administration. So it states that the 0.5% tax is levied on raw fish sales, and it's based on the sale price of raw fish, transfer sold, or otherwise conveyed within the boundaries of the city. It also includes within this tax raw fish delivered outside the boundaries of the city that are contracted for or agreed to be made within the city. So you've really limited what you're taxing. A lot of municipal taxation structures reach beyond that and tax all fish landed, and it's a landing tax on what's sold. So you have a more limited scope than that, but it does attempt to encompass all sales that are within your tax situs, is the way that we describe it. So the ordinance as written provides for a exemption process, and it currently notes the sale of raw fish for the sole purpose and use as bait as the sole exemption. But I know that council members and administration had other exemptions that they had, that you may have been thinking about. So as you raise those, we can go through what that looks like and how we would address that today. If you wanted to, and we can also address it later, of course, but generally speaking, if you do decide to implement another exemption, that can be done at tonight's meeting, you can amend the ordinance as introduced, because that would not be a substantial change to the ordinance to the degree that would require us to start over with the ordinance process. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind as we go through this. There is both an obligation to pay the tax on the seller, and an obligation to collect the tax on the buyer. And there's a registration requirement for buyers. So while the seller is technically bearing the tax, and they are the ones that pay the tax, it's incorporated into the price, and the tax is outlined, and when you were to look at a fish ticket or see the sale, you'll see the sales tax, and that's required so that they can follow and can see the impact that has. The buyer will go through the process of filing a tax form and collecting the tax and remitting it to the city. And the easiest way to think of this is like any other sales tax, when you pay tax on a good, and the storekeeper would be the one collecting the tax and then remitting it to the city. So the registration process allows the city to identify the buyers and also to help to provide the information and make sure everybody is aware of what compliance entails. Again, it's a very simple process. There are procedures for protest and appeal, and the fish tax return will be what we anticipate sort of a one-page tax return that is available through the city. This is not, this process, unlike the state's fisheries business tax, which is fairly complex, species-specific, has a lot of moving parts and a lot of pieces. This is a very simple tax. Is there any, I mean, I think that's probably a good starting place. One other thing to note is a lot of times it's very important to processors and sellers that you have a confidentiality provision. And so there is a confidentiality provision for the tax returns that are filed. So while the city can accumulate information that they receive from the buyers and from all the tax returns to get some ideas of some generalizations, you will have a mechanism to keep that confidential and protect the economic integrity of the businesses here.
Okay, thank you. And we might have some more questions during our discussion. Does the manager have anything to add before we open it up to discussion?
I don't think I have anything to add at this point.
Okay. Councilman Gleason?
So the one thing that I think we should talk about exempting is the VFDA and PISWAC's cost recovery and race sales, which I sent a letter to the city for that. And I think a simple way to do that would be to just include the term common property fishery in there, like either in the definition, well, wherever it would have to go, the definition of raw fish and maybe where we say we're levying the tax, what we're levying it against. And that should eliminate it because that's not part of the common property fishery. Or we could do the exemptions. We could do either or if we come to that consensus at the regular meeting. But I'm wondering from you, where would we put that if we did use that term common property, or, you know, whatever we got to put on it to be specific on what we're collecting that tax on?
And the city administration did forward those questions and asked me to be prepared to answer that question. So thankfully, I think I am. I mean, one of the things, I spent a lot of time talking with Susan and Dean today so I could really understand the hatchery, not only just in general, but the hatchery that we're talking about. These hatcheries are heavily regulated by the state of Alaska, and so they have a lot of expectations placed upon them and a lot of limitations on how they use their funds as a nonprofit. And also, so there's all these pieces that make them a very different animal than, say, a for-profit hatchery that, we're really not anticipating. We don't have, I don't believe, here right now, as far as I know. So because of that, because of the nature and also the close tie between these hatcheries and the state of Alaska, I'd recommend that you put it under the exemptions and you just say that you're exempting hatcheries are regulated by Alaska Statute 16.10. And that will cover them because they're permit holders under that provision. And they're subject to all of those things. And they have the cost recovery components. They also have, and they're also, their goal, they're all nonprofit associate, they are a nonprofit association, and their goal is to, in essence, to bolster and enhance the salmon fishery here. So it's the goal is not necessarily to profit or to have, and they're regulated even as to cost. They mandated market value as the price that they pay has to be within those regulations or those statutes. So for all of those reasons, I think the exemption is it's appropriate. It's a policy decision, of course, but it's completely appropriate, and it's very easily addressed in that way without too much fanfare. I don't think that we have a lot of complications there.
Sure.
There is something to note, and that's just that the Kachemak Bay shellfish industry might be, so there's legislation pending right now that's going to address hatcheries that deal with shellfish. I don't know how those work. Wasn't able to really get a feel for what that looks like when in comparison to the salmon hatcheries. So, but that will be something that the administration, we talked about it, and they'll keep their eye on that. I think the regulations will likely fall under 1610 as well. So, but again, that hasn't passed yet, and so we just don't have direction. Is that helpful?
It is. Currently, the only two hatcheries we've got are VFDA and PISWAC.
And is VFDA nonprofit and the
Yeah.
same as?
Yes, they do cost recovery and raceway sales. So the raceway sales are just, the fish go up, they take the eggs. It's the brood. So they take the eggs, the milk, then they sell the carcasses. You can't just, throw them out. So that's a raceway sale. And they're all bid. And we're really protecting our three processors here in town. We're really not affecting PISWAC or VFDA. We're trying to keep because it's an unfair advantage for the other, there's 12 processors. Only 3 of them are here. The rest of them deliver in Seward, Valdez, Whittier. And so we want to keep our 3 guys on a level playing field in the bid process, because it's a fraction of a penny that wins those bids. So if you have to pay a $20,000 tax, that's obviously going to affect your ability to win those bids. So that's all I got. I'm all for the exemptions.
So if that is an exemption you want to make, so just when we're in the regular meeting, then
Yeah,
bring it up, and then I can give you the language if you want. But I mean, again, I think it's like 6 words, so it's an easy one.
sure. There's other people that would have to agree with me on that, though.
Right,
So
right. Yeah.
only I am agreeing with that right now.
I guess I would just ask the chair to see if anybody would disagree with that idea of,
Does anybody on the phone disagree with adding that as an exemption for the hatcheries?
Yeah, I'm Elena, this is David. I'm not disagreeing with it at this point, but I'm not totally agreeing with it yet, so there you have it, right on the line.
Okay, do you have any other comments?
no, other than I
on the
agree
phone?
with it. I think,
Okay. Any other discussion on the phone, Ard or Allison?
Yeah, this is Councilmember Guard. I'm in wholehearted agreement with the exemption for cost recovery and raceway fish. If we disadvantage our local processors to where they can't be competitive for these, we lose the our share of the state levied raw fish tax, which is a way bigger deal. So for no other reason than that, I agree with the exemption for cost recovery fish and for raceway sales.
Any other discussion on the tax on the whole? Any other questions?
I guess I would say there was a little bit written in there, but the direct marketers, do they have their own little paragraph of rules? Or I saw that it was written in there, if you headed and gutted, that you were responsible to pay that tax. So they bring their fish to the dock and direct market their fish. There's a bunch of guys that do that, but they're going to be responsible to pay that tax. I guess my question is it going to be easy for them to understand what they have to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be easy for all the buyers to pay the tax. I think probably the most difficult part of the ordinance is individuals who are contracting for the sale of fish within the city, but the actual sale is happening elsewhere. So they contract for it here, and then the sale happens elsewhere, and we just need to pay attention to how that really works in practice. That is lawful. Many communities do that and more, but that is something we're going to have to really pay attention to. And you guys are also going to want to make sure that you're getting, public announcements out and information. A lot of your processors are very sophisticated. They obviously deal with the fisheries business tax that is imposed by the state, which again, far more complex, but to the extent that not every buyer, because it's any individual or entity, and whether they're acting as a principal agent or broker, purchasing raw fish from a seller, they're required to remit and collect the tax. So because of that, you might have less business, and I don't want to say less sophisticated in a way that has any derogatory meaning, but their business may be a lot smaller and a lot more fluid. And so you just want to make sure they know they've got like one-page form, and you want to make it easy for them to get those forms and to go through the process. And that administration might take a little bit of practice of that. But I think, I really think this is very doable and user-friendly, so it should be okay.
So question, Dave, maybe you can help me out here. So if somebody's doing their own marketing, if they're catching their own, they're not buying fish from anybody else, they're selling just their own fish?
Yeah.
Are we capturing that?
That's
Because
what I
they're
was
not really-
asking.
Yeah, so they're not really buying fish from somebody else, they're just catching them and selling them.
So in the case
But-
of a direct
yeah.
marketer, it would be the seller.
Could you talk into a mic? We have a couple people on the phone. Thank you.
The way it would work is in the case of a direct marketer, it would be the seller then who would be keeping it. Because he's going to be selling to a bunch of individuals like us.
Right.
And you wouldn't expect me to pay your fish tax. So in that case, it would be him or her, the boat owner who's selling the fish.
I think he's buying from himself.
Yeah, he's basically.
He is the buyer, but
He's catching it, he's bringing it up, and then he's selling it. So he would be responsible for the tax.
And that's
he-
plain to see in our,
Hope so, because in the sales tax ordinance, it's not plain, and we don't collect sales tax on it because there's some sales tax issues.
okay.
I guess one thing that I was seeing too that maybe you'd clear it up to is the obligation to pay the tax to the city is upon the seller. So if the seller doesn't have a buyer because they're the ones that do the direct marketing, I would think that that's in there so that they're the ones that are required to do the tax. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, that we never remove, exactly, like they have to pay the tax, and the ordinance makes it clear that their duty to pay the tax is separate and distinct from the buyer's duty to collect the tax. So they need to pay the tax, they should use the form, and even if they're negotiating outside for a price that, they still have that duty to pay the tax. It doesn't matter that that's occurring outside, some buyer is outside the boundaries of the city. But I do think that when we draft the forms, it would behoove us, I think it's a good point, that the code encompasses and applies to them as written, but it would be good for us to make sure that we have a form that we could even sort of just have a packet for them or something. A lot of this boils down to just making sure people have user-friendly, easy documents. And I know that Dean's working on that. We have been looking at the tax forms for various communities across the state, and you can really see which ones look a little intimidating and which ones are really straightforward. So I think it's a good point, though. I mean, because we can get a lot further if we have like a cover sheet, direct marketers use this packet. It's kind of.
And then not being in the fish business, so how do you, is it fish tickets, Dave, that you keep an eye on this? How do you keep an eye? Somebody goes out and catches X amount of pounds and sells them. How do we know that transfer is taken care of?
They have the exact same responsibility that we have, except for Tom or whoever you sell to takes care of our end, and they would have a fish ticket and they have to send that into the state.
So we
Or
get-
they might even be doing it electronically. I have no idea, I don't know how advanced it is. I've never done it, but
So there's a way that we can keep track of who's selling.
the state tracks them, so there's got to be a way that, through that they can be tracked.
And then they probably need buyer's licenses of some kind that possibly we could track with Cordova addresses or something. Or really a fishery, I guess, we could probably track it by a fishery.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what they have to have, but I was more interested in making sure they knew,
Yes.
that we advertise for them to, if they're direct marketing, because I don't want anybody to get in trouble over this. And a lot of those guys don't live here, so they don't know what we're doing. And then they get here and all of a sudden, they haven't been paying a tax, and I just don't want guys to get in trouble. So I want to make sure we advertise to the direct marketers so they know.
Well, I want to make sure that everybody's paying it though too. If Triton has to pay it, then the small marketer, we need to have that control. Wouldn't be fair for one paying, not the other. That's why I ask, how do we keep track of it, so to speak?
And
Oh, I was going to say, in the registrations requirements, number 6 was proof that the buyer maintains a business license as required by the code and the fisheries business tax with the state of Alaska. So maybe when we get some information from the state of Alaska about everyone that has that fishery business tax, we can check it with everyone that's registered locally here.
Yeah, I was going to say another regulatory check and balance is the business license. Theoretically, anybody here should have a business license as well.
No, but they don't. Oh, you're saying should.
Should, and as we make contact with them, there's also the information regarding the tax that goes forward in terms of the fishing business, so.
So as long as we're keeping an eye on that, and I hear that we should be getting some information from the state about the state business fishery tax, so maybe once we look at that too, we can see how it's done on the state level and how that compares to what we're doing.
Well, we signed a form for access to those records on the state level. Isn't that correct?
yes, yep, and that's been submitted. We're just waiting now for the state to provide those records.
At that same time, could we get a list of the fishery business tax licenses too?
So I think I'll have to look at how that information,
The confidentiality.
yeah, I mean, just
Well,
how, I mean, I think, so what you'll get is broken down by, what we've gotten in the past. And so we put it the request that really encompasses just about everything that's happening here. So it should include that because that's the number. So their license number is how we get some of the information, so it's broken out by name. And so we should get that information as part of the package of information, and then a breakdown of number, usually by species.
But we could use the list of names as our mailer of who to mail out all the
Should be
information
able
to.
to.
So any direct marketer is going to be on that list also, right?
Well, and I need to pay attention to the state. There's about 5, I think, different fishery business licenses, and so in each one is treated differently. So I just want to make sure, and I'll double check and confirm that we covered everything if we haven't, because I really didn't look. I didn't structure the request with an eye towards that. So I just want to make sure I don't inadvertently leave something out.
Okay.
And we'll follow up if we did.
And I think what we were trying to do, originally is we were trying to get the gross number so that we could be more predictive of our fish tax on an annual basis. But I think in this sense, those same numbers help us be predictive aggregately, but also, have some knowledge individually of who and what they're catching, so.
Anybody on the phone want to comment in for this discussion?
One thing, this is Jeff Garvey again. One thing we might want to keep an eye on here is it sounds like this may be a little bit labor intensive for enforcement when we come to the smaller end of the scale, direct marketers and such. And we just kind of maybe want to keep a running tally to make sure we're not expending more than we're taking in. So if we need to adjust our code here for this tax, we can do it so we're not losing money on this.
I think maybe some of the big processors here might be real helpful too, because they've been doing this stuff forever, so they know the ropes on it. And, you know, like Tom Carpenter, who's in the audience, you know, might be somebody we go to just for questions on the stuff we were just talking about, you know, lists, where we could get lists of who has a buyer's permit or whatever.
Well, I guess I was going to request almost that is, if we're done with our discussion, we do have fish buyer here. Maybe if we're missing something or something we should bring to our attention, if he's got anything to say, we can invite him to the chair and ask him.
Yeah, we can open it up for audience comments. Anybody else has any objection to that or any other comments before we do that? All right, anybody in the audience want to come up and be in the hot seat? You've been summoned.
Tom Carpenter, Copper River Seafoods, 300 Cannery Row. Interesting discussion. Yeah, I think there's a couple things I'd like to comment on that maybe I heard when you guys were asking questions. I mean, the Department of Revenue is going to be your easiest way to get how much each processor, you know, that number is readily available if you go through the proper channels. The one thing is, depending on, you know, forecasting for your, you know, your budgetary reasons, is that the Department of Revenue's numbers are a lot of times very delayed compared to what your schedule is. So that might be a little bit challenging. I think, you know, one thing to consider, and the first thing I was going to say when I come up here is I'm definitely in favor of the exemption on the cost recovery fish. You know, when you look at the big picture, it might not seem like a lot of money, you know, when you're talking about the total value of fish being purchased, but because cost recovery fish are purchased in huge blocks, huge value, and typically the value that they're paying the aquaculture associations is far greater than what the actual grounds price is. And like Mr. Gleason said, the bids are sometimes won by quarters of cents. That a $50,000 bill, a tax bill, would be a very big disadvantage to the processors in Cordova that are going to be engaged in bidding on cost recovery fish. And I think it's important that the city of Cordova continue to support what PSWAC has done for the city. And we want to try and bring as many pounds of fish as we can to Cordova, because not only are you bringing the fish to Cordova to keep things rolling, but you're also still generating the state raw fish tax off of all those pounds too, even though you may lose the 0.5% directly towards the city for, you know, projects like the harbor. But there's still a lot of value that's generated there. I think in regards to the conversation y'all were having about the small people, the individual fisherman that's trying to sell us, you know, I would say for the most part that those people are selling, generally speaking, very, very small amounts in dollar values worth of fish. I think it might not be a bad idea for you to consider just a flat fee for custom processors, to where you don't have to make them go through the rigmarole of filing these reports. Just have them come in and pay a fee once a year, you know, figure out what's, you know, a reasonable dollar value that they're going to pay. You know, the top guy that might sell all of his fish, you know, let's just say it's $100,000 a year. That's $5,000, you know, but most guys are probably selling less than $10,000 worth of fish. So charge them $200-300 and call it good, and don't deal with all the paperwork. You know, I mean, just make it simple. I mean, what you're really trying to gain here is you're trying to get the bulk of it. And I think that you're going to get that. I will say, and I haven't had a chance to completely read through there, but one thing that I am definitely not in agreement with in regards to language in this ordinance, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I read it kind of fast, is the reporting requirements are that it doesn't seem that it happens once a year. It seems like it happens the month after the fish were purchased. That seems excessive to me. I mean, not only are the processors doing all the paperwork and doing all the collecting for you, it seems that while things are in motion in the middle of the summer and we're trying to, just another bunch of paperwork dumped on the desks of the processors, seems like it might be unnecessary. I think the long-term goal is for you to collect the raw fish tax, and it seems very simple that, you know, the season here begins in April or in March. It's over by usually October 15th. I mean, put a deadline on it of like November 15th or something, say you have to have your tax paid by then. You know, and that anything after that, there'll be certain penalties that it will be, you know, levied upon you, similar to if you don't pay your sales tax in time. It just doesn't seem like we need to have this constant flow of paperwork to pay the same tax that we're ultimately could pay just once a year. It just seems unnecessary to me. I mean, that's basically all I have to say. I mean, I'll be glad to answer any questions if I can.
Are you talking about remittance of tax to the city? Is that what you were talking? It looks to me like it just tells you that you have a month to pay your tax on whatever month we decide, like you're saying, at the end of the season. That's how I'm reading it. I don't have my glasses, but is that what that says?
No, so generally, and you guys can, this is a matter of policy, we can change the payment schedule, but a lot of municipal taxes have a monthly tax return, in part because your collection enforcement capabilities are very different from the state of Alaska, and so they have the monthly returns in part, so someone doesn't get 6 months behind and you lose a year, so you're then trying to enforce for a year of back taxes and going through that process. It allows you to sort of stay on top of it. Also, municipal budgeting is a lot tighter because you have only so much to work with, so that keeps you informed and you have an understanding of how accurate you are and what money you have, and so that is why I believe they do it. But it is very easy, and again, this is the type of change, and I would definitely, if I were you, consult with Dean and with Alan, and, you know, I mean, I think that your administration is really going to be the one to talk to, not me, about this, but legally speaking, we can go to quarterly, or, you know, I think biannually. I think anything, an annual reporting basis may be difficult for the city to budget and to plan, because a lot of times you're projecting and, you know, values. And one really, I thought, interesting point was the point regarding the direct marketers and having just a flat fee. What I have seen in the past, based on that, they haven't applied it just to direct marketers, so I find that interesting, is when you get through the first year of taxation, when you have these direct market licensees having an idea of how much, then you can build in you can choose to either pay X or pay a flat fee of X percent of your last year's, and then you give them a refund if they don't. So you don't tax them more if they pay the flat fee, then you kind of refund the difference if they choose to verify at the end of the year. So that's a one way to incorporate that structure, because that probably is something that would have real value to them, I would think. So I don't know, those are the two comments. So I guess I would look to your administration on what.
Well, I think we would err on the side of regular reporting. I don't think that, you know, maybe the first month, the first time you do it, or the second time, you know, maybe a little more taxing, but you think that at some point, everybody's going to understand what they have to do and they're going to do it. I think our concern would be, and we deal with this on almost a daily basis. People are behind in their sales tax and behind in their property tax. And it's our responsibility as much as we can to collect the tax on time. And the farther you let somebody get down the road, the harder it is for them to pay the appropriate taxes. And you just, I don't think you want to put them in that situation. And for us, it's a timely thing. We send out bills for utilities and those kinds of things. People get past doing their utilities too. You'd probably be surprised how many people we have in payment plans. And so from our end, we're trying to prevent those things. We think timely reporting, and I just don't think it'll be a big deal for everybody.
You know, one thing,
So since this isn't like funds that we're going to spend every year, this is basically money going into a savings account for the harbor. And we are going to have a bill to pay on that once a year, but not this year. I don't think we start paying until next year, right? If we even get the thing. Yeah, so I'm with Tom on that one as far as once a year. It's probably 1,000 times easier for those guys to do that. And they're not going broke, so I'm sure they'll be able to pay the bill.
so one way to kind of compromise on that, one thing that might be a really good structure, because I do think, imagine you're trying to collect for a whole year. If someone's, that could really, your ability to collect may change drastically. However, having a situation where they pay on an estimated tax amount, so they have an estimate, that's why it's nice if the first year you have a regular payment schedule, then you incorporate or you can choose to file once a year, pay your estimate based on last year's sales, or, and then you give them back the difference, or they give you any difference in the amount at the end of the year. Then you're eliminating that risk that the administration is not going to see the funds, or is trying to plan and use funds that they don't have access to yet and haven't collected. And so it will really change, I think, how functional, because some of that is collecting for, so I don't know, because you also have the interest that is paid out on those funds. So, I mean, I would recommend you think about ways to structure it so that you're meeting the processor's needs to efficiently run their business, because one thing a lawyer will always tell you, or should, is that taxes should never change the way someone does business, right? You should never have such a significant impact that you change the way someone practices in any other way, because that is, so that usually leads to vulnerabilities in other ways. So if there is a way to give them that comfort while still ensuring that the city has their funds in hand, that would be
Perhaps it's a
in the best
choice.
interest.
You can pay up front based upon an estimated amount, and then we'll have to audit that account at the end of the year. That's the way they do use taxes in certain places. When you pull a building permit, you have to put an estimated value on the materials that you're buying, and then you have to pay the tax on that up front, because they go to other locations and buy those. And then at the end of that project, when it's done, you bring in the receipts and you audit that account, and you either get a refund or you pay more. And so this would be a similar thing for, on January 31st, you pay X amount of tax, and then at December 31st, we audit the account.
And that is, it is done. My only question for the industry would be how sporadic, what is the delta, between one year and another? Are you seeing enough of a difference that it becomes really hard to estimate? But that allows them to budget too. So, it's a very easy thing to change the ordinance to allow either the monthly tax return or the estimated payment by the 15th of whatever date we'd use, January or whatever, and then submit if you submission of the annual tax return, and then they pay the difference, or where they provide evidence, they give us the documentation so we can pay them.
I would say that it's drastically different from year to year. It's not, it's very rarely even close. It's just the nature of the industry, it's just very volatile. Trying to plan for things is very difficult, and I will say this. The state, we pay the raw fish tax to the state once a year. We pay it on November 20th every year. You're basically collecting 99.5% of this tax from 5 processors in town. Small guys are not going to amount to much. It's really going to be an irrelevant number in the long run, although fairness does need to take place. And I think that some sort of model could be set up to make that happen. Just making this as simple as we can, making sure that the money gets paid is going to be way simpler in the long run. If the city wants to audit it the next spring based on what the Department of Revenue has given them in return in regards to the amount of pounds each processor bought, that's going to be very simple to do also, just so you can check up on things. I will say a couple other things. This tax is based on the grounds price that the processor is paying. Every single processor potentially could be paying a different grounds price. So when you go and do an audit on Copper River Seafoods versus Trident Seafoods, every single opener could be different. You're not going to be looking at one specific number. So that's one thing that you're going to have to consider. The second thing is, and I think I heard this earlier, and like I said, I didn't read this, I read it very quickly. When the fisherman sells the fish on the grounds and signs the fish ticket, that is where the purchase takes place. It does not take place in the city limits. So I'm not sure if that affects what you have written in this, but I also noticed that it says raw fish. It doesn't say seafood. I don't know if that has any implications, if that's just a technicality. And the other thing I would say is that there is no...
Hey, Carp, can you speak into the mic a little? Can't hardly hear anything you're saying.
Sure, sorry about that, Dave. The last thing I would say is that there is no direct deduction for raw fish tax from a purchasing point of view. There are standard deductions for aquaculture assessment taxes and marketing taxes. The raw fish tax is specifically paid by the processor. There was no standardized deduction, so when I buy X amount of fish from this individual, there's just not a standard tax. The processors are the ones that are paying this tax. Yes, they can figure out the way to extract that from the grounds price, but it's not going to be a clear and simple process. So I just need everybody to understand that. So that's all I have.
And so I can, if you want me to go through those, or no?
We're going to go ahead and go to Councilmember Baylor, and we have a public hearing, so maybe we'll push that back a little bit if there's no objections. What's that?
Can I throw out one comment regarding all of this?
Sure. Councilman Baylor's had his hand up for a little bit. Can we have him go first, and then we'll go to you?
Sure, yeah, no problem. Before you adjourn to the other thing.
Yeah, we're going to go a little bit longer. So Councilman Baylor, and then we'll go to you, Allison.
So I'll just comment on I think I'm leaning towards the once a year collection, and then the comment about people getting behind on their taxes. I think you're more likely to find that with your smaller processors or not processors, excuse me, sellers, direct marketers. But to Councilman Guard's point is, we got to look at the cost of collecting from these, and so maybe that flat rate system comes into play. So if you're collecting a flat rate, in essence, you're going to get the taxes to the people that are more likely not to fold or not pay up. But Trident, Ocean Beauty, the others, they're going to be here. They're going to pay their taxes. So I just kind of throw that out there. And I like the idea of that flat rate. And we could adjust it over the years depending on what it is.
All right, and I'm going to let Tom Carpenter sit down back to the audience unless there's a comment on the phone for him. Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Allison.
Okay, yeah, this topic, I guess I do have a side I'm leaning on pretty hard. I spent 30 years in the seafood industry, 25 of those helping pay the taxes and working in the office and all that and such. All the processors are probably gonna have a fairly good expense, just programming it into their systems to have this additional tax, whether it's gonna go on fish tickets or whatever, but their accounting system and their fish ticket programs are gonna have to be modified to handle one more tax that's kind of different than the other ones. But in the same regards, I don't see any reason, and Councilmember Gleason kind of mentioned it earlier, but why it has to be done more than once a year. Everybody that buys fish, including the direct marketers, have to have their form into the state by, March 30th, I believe. And, we don't get it from the state, but they have to pay it to the state at that point in time. And there's no reason we shouldn't be able to handle, they should be able to take that and figure it out pretty easy, what it is. But the tax itself, I assume the process is probably going to collect that from their fishermen, so that's going to have to be added to their fish tax. And there's just no reason we should need to make it more complicated, but we're government, so I know that means we probably got to try to make it as complicated as we can. But if the tax is paid once a year, these are going to be used, this money, like Councilmember Gleason said, is used to pay back bonds, or we can set our bond payments up to whenever we want them to be. We can, if we actually make them pay in March when they file a form, not like the canneries that, they have to pay, but then the state holds it for 7 or 10 months or whatever. We shouldn't need that money but once a year. Certainly not before the fishing season every year, because the harbor maintenance isn't going to happen in the middle of the winter anyway. So anyway, I fully support once a year, at the same time as the processors have to give that to the state, and that should do us good. This shouldn't be so complicated.
Hey, Councilmember Guard, do you have anything that you want to add before we head on to the public hearing, unless there's more discussion that you guys are wanting to have?
I think everybody covered my thoughts on it.
I agree.
Anybody else? All right, I think you guys covered everything that I would say too, so we'll go ahead and adjourn at 6:49, and should we do the public hearing right after, or take a break?
Oh, we had one more thing to do.
Well, we
Oh.
had something else on,
Well, oh, yeah. I mean, I think that was there if we had time, so,
If we had time, we don't have time.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move number 2 to next time.
yeah.
Meeting adjourn, or public work session adjourn, whatever this one is. And we'll just go to the public hearing now and take a break between now and the regular meeting. So,
So go right into the public hearing now? Yeah. Is that what you said?
yeah, we'll do the public
Yes.
hearing now.
yes.
Okay.
We'll do the public hearing, and then we'll take a break for the regular meeting. Okay. So City Council public hearing, April 3rd, 2019, at 6:49 PM.
And
I
I'll
need to
call the roll on that. Mayor Copeland is absent. Tom Baylor?
Here.
Ken Jones is absent. Jeff Guard?
Here.
Melina Meyer?
Here.
Ann Schaefer is absent. David Allison?
Right.
Here.
And David Gleason.
Here.
That's a quorum of council.
So this is the public hearing, Resolution 04-19-15, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Cordova Alaska, amending a service rate and correcting the wording within the section of the 2019 fee schedule approved as Resolution 12-18-34 on December 19, 2018. And this was on page 1 of the regular meeting packet, and this was a typo error, if I'm correct.
Yeah, it's just a correction of a typo. It should have been $15 a mile, and it was listed at 15 cents a mile.
And fee-setting resolutions
Yeah.
require public hearings, so that's why it's in a public hearing.
And then for public hearings, we open it up to the audience for any
Any comments
Any
on
comments?
this item? Yeah.
Any comments on the fee schedule typo? Resolution 04-19-15, it's on page 1 of the regular meeting packet. Any takers? Going once? Twice? Okay, the public hearing is adjourned, and we will have a 19-minute recess till the regular meeting.